We will write British authorities for health and safety.
Committee for further and Commission also. Thank you.
So now I'd like to move to the last point on the agenda, regrouping two petitions regarding the pollution of hydrofluorosilicic acid. First is 210 per 2007 by Rober Pocock on behalf of Voice of Irish Concern for the Environment, and the second petition is 211 per 2007 by Walter Graham on behalf of the Council of Northern Ireland against fluoridation. I would like to ask Mr. Pocock to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. First of all, thank you for persevering with this petition on fluoridation, because many residents of Ireland and England, because it only applies to residents in England, consider the European Parliament the last hope of protecting consumers, especially our children, from this objectionable policy. I'd just like to cover the issue from three angles. Firstly, I'd like to remind you as to what the response of the European Commission has been to many MEPs' questions over the years. This response was to obtain an opinion from the Scientific Committee on Health and Environmental Risks, and I'd like to just summarise the risk-benefit analysis that they have helpfully provided. And then I'd like to come back once again to the Commission and suggest that the response that has come from the Commission in this issue has been totally inadequate to protect our children. Now, this petition came to the committee in May 2008 on the last occasion I was here, which seems an awful long time ago. And the MEPs still haven't been satisfied with the response from the Commission. So eventually, towards the end of that year, it intervened and it demanded a risk assessment from the Scientific Committee on Health and Environmental Risks. And their preliminary opinion was published in 2009, and it confirmed the indiscriminate nature of this medical treatment. It actually described the practice of putting this fluoride in the water as a crude measure of systemic fluoride treatment without a detectable threshold for bone and dental damage. It is very hard to imagine anything clearer than that. It's treatment and it involves damage. So SCHER, to its credit, then invoked a public hearing with stakeholders in September 2010 here in Brussels. And I have to say something about that particular public hearing. It was a breath of fresh air for anybody from Ireland or England or the UK or anybody interested in this policy. Because for the first time you could actually have an open, frank discussion, and the members of the Scientific Committee on the panel responded to our questions in a positive manner. Such a meeting would be completely impossible in Ireland or the UK. On the subject of fluoridation policy, there is a vapour cloud which is engineered by the UK government and by the Irish government. So now let's come back to SCHER's opinion, which was published in May 2011. That's over a year, almost 2 years ago. And it has not been taken on board by the UK government one whit, or by the Irish government either. The first conclusion that the SCHER came to was that people do not need fluoride for normal growth and development. We are regularly told in Ireland that everybody has to have it, and has to have it in their water where they can't avoid it. Scher also said excessive fluoride intake may be linked with adverse health effects. Yes, it does. It is linked with that. And they also zoned in on the risk to children. They said it's easy for children to exceed the fluoride intake, which causes some dental fluorosis when they drink water fluoridated with the levels which obtain in Ireland. And finally, to bring the thing to a very pragmatic conclusion, they said there is no obvious advantage of water fluoridation compared with applying fluoride topically to the teeth, as everybody else in the European Union does. And the biggest concern that we still have is that the Scher Committee said that the people at greatest risk are the very youngest people, and they're the greatest risk of exceeding the fluoride limits. An example being that if an infant is fed baby formula made up with tap water, they will receive 100 times more fluoride than from mother's milk. So we have the most vulnerable in our society at the greatest risk, and that is what the scientific committee from Europe has said. Ireland is proof of how easy it is to exceed the limit, because since the petition was declared permissible in 2007, about 5,000 15-year-olds in Ireland will have developed damaged tooth enamel from exposure to fluoridated tap water. 1,000 a year have damage which requires some form of treatment. And probably in the UK, because parts of the UK around the West Midlands and East Midlands and the North East are also fluoridated, probably another 10,000 15-year-olds will have been affected. Inexplicably, England still adds more fluoride to the drinking water than we do in Ireland. We reduced it because of the risk from fluorosis. However, evidence of fluorosis in England is systematically suppressed, what appears to be for political reasons. Why, if you have this damage occurring in your children, why would you not be open about it? And then widening this question to you, other people in other member states, why do you not find this moderate, or what they call moderate or severe fluorosis? Why do you not find it among the 436 million people in other member states? Simple. You have decided that the risk-benefit profile of adding fluoride to drinking water means that mass medication with fluoride cannot be justified. The Scher Committee already said it was a crude measure, and you, other member states, have also agreed it's so crude and it can't be justified. Were these member states to misuse drinking water, as in Ireland and England, fluorosis in children would soar, and a significant sector of the youngest and most susceptible members of society would be exposed to levels of fluoride that exceed the tolerable upper limits expressed by the European Food Safety Authority. And as regards traditionally accepted safe levels, about 60% of adults would consume more than the safe level in the UK, and in Ireland, the evidence suggests that it's above 70%. So there's a lifetime accumulation of this stuff in people's bones. So the risk-benefit assessment by the scientific committee was as clear as anything. It could hardly have been clearer. And indeed, the Commission has to be congratulated for having published a layman's version of the scientific committee's findings only this month, on the 3rd of February, where there is a layman's version up on the website, and I quoted from the layman's version because the points are so clear. Now, what effect has this very clear message coming from European scientists, what effect has it had on the UK and the Irish governments? None at all. That was in May 2011. The report was published. In Ireland, they said, no, if you want this policy changed, you can go to the courts, which is totally unacceptable. On Saturday in Hampshire, this last Saturday, there was a meeting of people representing residents, 200,000 of whom are about to be fluoridated against their will, and they are going to have to send postcards now stating that they refuse their consent to be treated with this product. So the risk-benefit is being ignored by Ireland and the UK. But there is another major consideration, which is the legal aspect of this practice. Way back in '63, when the Irish government mandated that everybody should have this in their water, they said you can use any type of fluorine in the water, and then went ahead and used the specific hydrofluorosilicic acid, which happens to come from the waste product of fertilizer production. And the Irish government, the Irish state at that time had a very thriving fertilizer industry, and obviously it had some very difficult waste to control and make safe. So if it's hardly a coincidence that this product was used just at that time. This waste is still contaminated to this day with lead, arsenic, beryllium, chromium, all suspected carcinogens or neurotoxins, and it's still used today. It's actually named as the product to be used in Irish drinking water. So when you realise where this product comes from, you won't be surprised that it's never been risk assessed in Ireland or the UK. The World Health Organization promised here in Brussels in 2003 that they would send a risk assessment on this very product, this molecule, hydrofluorosilicic acid, and we're still waiting for it. So other member states, you are very aware of the problem, and you totally reject mass medication of public drinking water using this waste byproduct, the dose of which is impossible to regulate. It bioaccumulates in the bones of consumers over their lifetime and permanently damages the teeth of around half their children. It's interesting to note that on other risk assessment and risk management issues, there's been an immediate reaction from the Commission in relation to the PIP breast implants, which many of you will be familiar with. Here we had another form of silicon which was found to be potentially hazardous, and the Commission realised that the risks were much greater than previously thought, so they introduced and passed a new directive, 2003-12, and that totally changed the risk profile of the material silicon that was being used by PIP company, and they revoked all the approvals of the existing breast implant materials. So they said you have to resubmit them before you can use this product as a medical device. Now, the contrast couldn't be greater. The EU intervened immediately. They realised the risk to women with breast reconstructive surgery was totally unacceptable. But when it comes to fluorosilicates that are added for the water, to everybody to consume in Ireland or parts of the UK, including bottle-fed babies and children, the European Commission stands by and does nothing.
I'll ask you to conclude now because the interpreters are going to leave us in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Just to conclude, thank you.
Now, what is the problem that seems to the Irish and British UK governments find so difficult? This is a totally unauthorised, unrisk-assessed product that's put into the water. And there are 30 other fluoride products that are licensed, and these are ones for topical application that are used throughout Europe and used widely for the very same purpose of preventing dental decay. Now, I'm saying again, and I'm pleading with the committee to press the European Commission on this, that the Commission is very well aware of the legislation which is there regarding medicines, regarding foods, and it must, that is contravened by drinking water fluoridation. It is incumbent on the Commission to implement these, this legislation, and that's the only way that our children can be protected in Ireland and the UK. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Vă mulțumesc mult pentru prezentarea dumneavoastră.
Thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation. I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the Commission, Mr. Joachim de Eugenio. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the petitioner for the introduction, which I think gave a comprehensive overview. So I will not repeat also the history, etc. I will keep it brief. I'd like to also thank the petitioner for giving such a positive feedback to the opinion of the Scientific Committee and the chair, and the particular efforts that they made in the public hearing, because we agree that the Scientific Committee has made an excellent effort. We recall the time when we had a discussion here about whether we should look into the scientific evidence, and when we agreed to ask the Scientific Committee for advice. And we thought that this was a very good way forward to bring it open to a transparent debate, to an open debate. And we applaud the process and the result. That is absolutely indisputed. We are very happy with the result, and we've taken note of it. We have had a careful analysis, as you did. This is not a place here maybe to go through line by line. I would have other observations, such as that there are also other sources of fluoride that were mentioned in there and have to be seen in context. But I think the main comment I was going to make, and that's probably the most pertinent one, is the key question that we had to answer from the outset is there legislation in breach? And in the last point the petitioner made, that was alleged again, but we have again assessed and looked at the situation, and we still come to the same conclusion, that as far as the legislation that is currently in place in the EU is concerned, there is no breach. Now, obviously, it is then up to Member States, and it's not for the Commission to say whether or not a certain policy should then be pursued, as long as the legislation on EU level is respected. And that is really where we still are. We have also, and here I would like to refer to a reply of Commissioner Potočnik to the Parliament on a written question in 2011. That is the question 4919. We've also looked in the light of the Scientific Committee's response and in the light of the revised guidelines of the World Health Organization, which are the basis for setting limit values in the Drinking Water Directive, whether this would have enough evidence to suggest that we would have to revise EU legislation. And as Commissioner Potočnik replied, is the Commission doesn't see a reason at the moment to do so. So we are very welcoming this scientific debate. We are very happy for that debate to continue and to provide further evidence that emerges in this context. But as far as EU legislation is concerned, we still come to the same conclusion that we had from the outset. We are of the opinion that there is no evidence for breach of the legislation in question. And B, we don't see that there is sufficient scientific evidence which would justify a revision of the legislation in question. So I stop here, looking at the time, but happy to continue further. Thank you.
Vă mulțumesc mult pentru prezentare.
Thank you very much for your response. We only have 6 minutes left, so I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Helmer, and I will ask him to be very brief. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. As always, I will observe your instructions. Can I congratulate Mr. Pocock on his extremely measured and informative contribution. My position is that as a starting point, I feel very badly about medicating water supplies and forcing any kind of medication onto the whole of the population without their consent and without their choice. I think that is my instinctive reaction, and therefore I would support any kind of medication in drinking water only if the case were absolutely overwhelming. Now, it does seem that the case is not absolutely overwhelming. Mr. Pocock spoke about damage to teeth as a result of excessive fluoride. I saw a report on my computer in my inbox this morning from Ireland, and I'm sorry, I only had a few minutes to glance at it. It's work in process. It will be published shortly, but we saw the draft. And I skimmed through the executive summary on the draft, and that did suggest that the current levels of fluoridation actually cause a wide range of health problems beyond the simple issue of teeth. I think that's a matter for concern. I'm not an expert in these areas, but it seems perfectly clear that there are strong arguments in both directions, and in particular very strong negative arguments. As a Eurosceptic, I am rather pleased to hear that the Commission doesn't propose to interfere in the prerogative of Member States in this matter, but on the substantive issue of whether water should be fluoridated, I started out rather negative about it, and I have to say that having heard what we've heard this morning, I am much more negative about it than I was to start with. Thank you.
Vă mulțumesc. Dau în continuare cuvântul domnului
I would like to give the floor to Mr. Murphy now.
Thank you. Thank the petitioner very much for his presentation and for his campaigning on the issue. The presentation was very, very clear. I think it's clear that there's a very strong case against fluoridation in terms of the health damages. It's completely accepted, the issue of dental fluorosis, but also the other issues that are raised of other health issues. Questions of impact on the environment, the leakage into the water supply generally, or into lakes and so on, affecting fish spawning, other issues. And it's clear, like the petitioner presented in terms of the SURE report, that the benefits don't, it is not necessary for public health. It's clear when the other member states don't engage in it. And so the precautionary principle should clearly apply here, and we shouldn't be, having fluoride imposed in the water. The other question here, just briefly, is the democratic question, in the sense of the right of communities not to have fluoride imposed upon them if they don't want. And that's an extremely important question here, because it's clear, in Ireland there is not a wide-ranging public debate and so on about this issue, and where people have decided democratically to participate, or in the case like the petitioner outlined in England, whereby people are having fluoride imposed on them against their wishes. So I think it's important that the committee continues to press the Commission and the Irish government and the English government to remove fluoride from the water.
I would now like to give the floor to Mrs. Harkin now.
Thank you very much, and I too would like to congratulate Rober Pocock. I was here the last time when he presented this, and I've been supporting him all along. I'll be very brief. 3 points I'll make. First of all, the Commission in its response said it did not believe that fluoride could be assessed as a medicine. And yet the question is, why do Member States add it to the drinking water? Because if something is a medicine, then it has properties for either treating or preventing disease. Now, Member States add it because they believe it helps to prevent dental caries. So obviously there's an issue here as to whether it's a medicine or not. But our colleague from the Commission said a few moments ago that there was not sufficient scientific evidence to justify a revision. Now, I haven't had a very long look at the SURE report, but I've looked at it. And some of the conclusions from the SURE report, which is quite recent, would seem to me to be sufficient for the Commission to look at this again. Because the report actually says that there is a risk for dental fluorosis in children, and a threshold cannot be detected. And it talks about the upper tolerable level. Now, this is the upper level, not a lower level, but the upper level. And it says, and I'm quoting directly from the report, it's exceeded in children between 6 and 12 if they live in an area with fluoridated drinking water, and they drink more than 1 litre of water per day, and they use fluoride toothpaste. And remember, the amount of fluoride toothpaste to be used is pea-sized. Most people use about 3 or 4 times that amount. So add that to fluoridated drinking water, and you're way above the upper tolerable level for children between 6 and 12. And in children from 1 to 6, if they drink just half a litre of drinking water and use pea-sized amount of fluoridated toothpaste, the upper level is again exceeded. And finally, for infants less than 12 months, and Robert has spoken about this, it says, and I disagree with him on this, on just one point, he said that the exposure to fluoride is 100 times more than in breast milk. It's in fact 200 times more than in breast milk. And that is hugely significant. So I would say to the Commission, given that those are the results from the Share report, I believe that there is certainly evidence, whether they consider it significant or not, I certainly do, but certainly there is evidence which means that they need to look at this issue again. And just a final comment. We have a Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine. Many European countries have signed it: Bulgaria, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Greece, Spain, etc. Almost 20 countries have signed it and ratified it. 2 countries have not, the UK and Ireland. And of course the reason for that, or one of the reasons certainly, is they're adding fluoride to the water. And that, what Article 5 in that convention says, any intervention in the health field may only be carried out after the person concerned has given free and informed consent to it. Now I know that's a side issue, and I know the main issue here for the Commission is the scientific evidence sufficient? I would suggest to the Commission that the report on which they are relying, the Share report, does give sufficient scientific evidence to suggest that they need to look at the legislation again and that we may need a revision of legislation.
Thank you. I'll give the floor now to Mr. Yar.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich würde auch sagen, dass
Thank you very much. I would also say that we should keep this petition open and ask the Commission to do their utmost to deal with this issue. It just occurred to me, in fact, that what's happening at the moment is socialist in a way. When I was in the DDR and when I was young, we were talking about the addition of fluorine to water as well. It was done. So anyway, I agree with you that drinking water is access to is something which is access to by all, and you can't just be adding what you want to it. So if I buy something in the supermarket, I know what I'm purchasing and I know what it contains. My question to the Commission: we've got a framework directive, drinking water quality, and I'm just wondering about whether you can have these voluntary additions. Are they covered by pharmaceutical law or not? I'm not very happy with the idea of just adding something just because somebody feels they want to do it. I think that we need to look at the figures a little more closely. So I would like to agree with the petitioner, and I feel also this is not in order and it should be looked into in more detail by the Commission, and we in the Petitions Committee should be lending a hand to that as well. So I think we should keep the petition open.
Very briefly. Thank you.
Well, the only thing, well, thanks for all the contributions. The only thing I'd like to add to make it also very clear is that it's not the Commission's own interpretation that there's not enough new scientific evidence, but we are basing ourselves on the conclusions of the World Health Organization, and the revised guidelines have been published last year, and they have discussed all the points that also are presented in the Share report. So we are in a sense being consistent with the guidelines and with the recommendations from the World Health Organization. Now, of course, scientific evidence always evolves. If there's new scientific evidence and the World Health Organization comes to the conclusion that the situation has changed, so be it. But that is why we are coming to that point that we don't see a need to revise the Drinking Water Directive. I think it's the only thing I want to add at this stage. Thank you.
Vă mulțumesc foarte mult.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, I would like to recommend that this petition remain open. Now we've completed the agenda for today. We've taken note of the request to transfer point 31 from list A to list B.